Well now, are you settled? Good. Now here's our little trick. Let your eyes soften, not closed, just hazy. Let the room blur at the edges as if it's breathing with you. And you'll find that the harder you try to stay awake, the sooner sleep will come. Let your arms loosen and your legs. Let your hands fall heavy against the blankets and just breathe slow and steady. If you hear fingernails tracing lightly along the wall beside your bed, don't pay it any heed, because they usually stop when they realize you've noticed. Now, let's begin tonight's stories. They said the smell met you before the door did. It was a thick, sour sort of air that clung to your clothes and followed you home, if you had one to go to. At the edge of Skibbereen town stood the workhouse, a squat grey place with walls high enough to hide the fields beyond. Inside, hundreds lived side by side and still managed to be alone. The days began with the bell. You rose from your cot before the sun, washed in cold water and lined up for breakfast, a dipper of gruel or maybe a scrap of bread if you were lucky. Then work, always work. The men broke stones, the women scrubbed and sewed. The children swept and carried and kept quiet. Families who arrived together were torn apart before they could even sit. You might hear the wail of a mother once or twice fading down the hall as she was dragged to another wing. After that, most stopped crying. You learned fast that noise got you noticed. That was the world 12-year-old Maeve Flynn knew. She'd been there almost a year, long enough to find her way around without being seen, and long enough to earn herself a reputation. The girl who smiled where there was nothing to smile about. The matrons didn't like her much, the guards liked her even less, but Maeve had a secret, a reason to grin when no one else could. And her name was Una. Maeve met her one foggy morning in the yard, sitting on a barrel with her bare feet swinging. "Shouldn't you be inside?" Maeve asked. Una just looked at her, wide-eyed. "I was, but it's dull in there." And that was that. From then on, they were inseparable. One living, one not, though Maeve didn't quite realize that at first. They made a pair, the two of them, Maeve all grit and elbows, and Una who jumped at her own reflection. When the matron's back was turned, they'd slip through the laundry or the kitchens whispering jokes about the guards' crooked noses, or who snored loudest in the dormitory. "Bet you a potato you can't pinch a bun from the tray," Maeve said one morning. Una crossed her arms. "I could if I wanted." "So why don't you?" "Because I'm polite, that's why." Maeve smirked. "You're a ghost, not a lady." "I'm both," Una said, "and a better one than you." They giggled so loud that a washerwoman shouted through the door for quiet, and Maeve had to stuff her apron in her mouth to stop laughing. When the other children saw Maeve talking to thin air, they only rolled their eyes. "That Flynn girl's cracked," one muttered. "It wouldn't be the first the place drove mad," said another. Maeve didn't care. She had a friend who never stole her blanket or tattled to the guards. That was worth all the funny looks in the world. The weeks rolled on, the nights got colder, the gruel thinner, but Maeve and Una were always up to something. They'd hide under the stairwell at night and play Guess the Footsteps. "That's the matron's boots," Maeve whispered. "No, that's the one with the limp," Una said. "It's matron, I'm telling you. I know that stamp anywhere." "Fine, loser has to lick the spoon from the medicine pot." "That's not a game, that's suicide," Maeve hissed, and they both had to bury their faces in their sleeves to keep from laughing. Once, Una dared Maeve to sneak into the sewing room and swap the matron's measuring tape for a length of string. "She'll be making dresses fit for dogs," Una whispered. Maeve grinned. "Then the guards can finally wear something that suits them." Another time they found a cracked mirror leaning behind a pile of firewood. Una stood in front of it, squinting. "I don't see me," she said softly. Maeve frowned. "Well, maybe you're standing wrong." "I've tried every kind of standing there is," Una muttered. "Maybe I'm shy." "Or ugly." "Take that back." Maeve laughed. "All right, fine, you're beautiful. You're the prettiest invisible Egypt in the room." "I'll haunt your toes tonight," Una said. "You already do. They're freezing." That night, a new batch of children arrived from the fever hospital. The girls went to scrub the dormitory floors before they came in. The guards stood near the door, watching. One of them, an older man with a crooked back, stared at a broken cot by the wall, its legs splintered clean through. He nudged the other with his elbow. "Do you see that bed there?" "Yeah, what of it?" "That's where the woman got knocked clean out. Do you remember her? The one who wouldn't let go of her boy." The other guard grunted. "Oh yeah, that was a night. They both hit the ground like sacks of spuds when Murphy clocked them with his club." "Hit the lad square, didn't he?" "Aye, and they didn't get up after either. Both of them still as stone." The older man spat on the floor. "And the girl, what was her name? The one they dragged off screaming?" "I don't know, but she didn't last long after that. She stopped eating, remember? We buried her in the same pit as the others. The best place for her. Lots of trouble for a scrawny thing." Maeve went still. The cloth slipped from her hands. She looked down the corridor where Una usually waited, humming to herself on the step. But Una wasn't there. That night Maeve found her sitting by the window, staring into nothing. "What's wrong with you?" Maeve whispered. Una didn't answer. "Did you hear them earlier? About the girl who starved?" Una's lip trembled. "Oh, I didn't mean—" Maeve started, but Una's eyes filled with tears. "I heard it too," she said quietly. "I just didn't want you to hear it." For days after that, Una barely spoke. She still followed Maeve around, but her laughter was gone. Maeve tried everything, telling jokes, pulling faces, even whispering insults just to get a rise. "You know," she said one morning, "for a ghost, you're dreadful company." Una gave her the smallest smile. "You'll have to find a new one, so." Maeve nodded. "Fine, I'll make friends with the rats. They have better manners." That got a tiny laugh, but it didn't last. Then, one stormy evening, the matron sent Maeve to fetch coal from the infirmary, the one no one used anymore since the fever. She took her lantern and went alone. The door groaned open. The smell hit her, damp wood and something older beneath. She heard footsteps behind her. "Una?" No answer. Inside, beds stood in crooked rows, the sheets yellowed and stiff. The lantern flickered, then Maeve saw them, shapes moving in the dim, like the walls had come to life. She blinked, and suddenly the room was full again, women, crying, guards shouting, a small boy screaming as they pulled him from his mother's arms, a girl, Una, dragged backwards, kicking, while her mother was struck hard across the back of the head. The guards swung again. The club caught the boy. Both fell to the ground, still, not moving, blood flowing from the backs of their heads. Maeve's hands shook. She tried to move, to call out, but her voice wouldn't come. The scene blurred. The sound faded. And then all that was left was Una sitting on a cot, pale as snow, a bowl of food untouched before her. Maeve stumbled back. The lantern dropped. The light died. When it flared again, the infirmary was empty, just the echo of rain against the window and her own breath in the cold. She turned, and Una stood there, faint as smoke. Maeve wanted to shout, to run, but instead she just said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Una smiled sadly. "I liked how you saw me, like I was still here." Maeve swallowed hard. "You are? Maybe, for a bit." Una looked toward the door. "Thank you for the laughing, Maeve." Before Maeve could move, the ghost of her best friend stepped into the light and was gone. They found Maeve, hours later, sitting by the empty coal bin, her eyes red but her face calm. When they asked what happened, she only said, "I was saying goodbye." After that, she kept mostly to herself, but every so often someone passing the infirmary late at night swore they heard giggling from inside. Two girls whispering secrets where no one could catch them. He liked the sound of his own steps. They clipped down the boring, neat and smart, as if he were marching to applause. No one watched, only briars, nettles, and a few crows, but he kept the rhythm anyway. He held his chin high. If anyone had looked from a cottage door, they would have seen a man walking like a toast at a wedding. His name was Cormac O'Brien, last of the O'Briens in the parish. The old house stood behind him on the hill, father gone, mother gone, brother and sister gone. He kept the graves trimmed. He told their names at Mass on the right days. He told himself he had done his duty. If he told himself often enough, it felt true. Evening sagged low and mild. Midges drifted above the ditch. The air had the sweet bite of clean grass. He walked because he liked people to see him walk, and because he had shaved, put on a crisp shirt, and needed somewhere to carry it. That was when he saw her. She sat on the low stone wall at the bend by the stream, bare feet, a simple white dress to mid-calf, clean but plain. Long dark hair with a soft shine the light seemed to borrow. She wasn't watching the road. Her gaze hung somewhere below her knees. One hand brushed the top stones, slow and gentle, as if smoothing a tablecloth no one else could see. Cormac slowed, then squared himself. There was a way to meet a woman on a road, and he had a way for such things. "Good evening," he said, warm and rich, as if there was an audience in the hedges. She didn't answer. If she heard, the sound sank into her stillness and didn't come back. He stepped closer. The wall was no higher than his thigh. Up close, he saw the fine cheekbones, the long lashes, the soft gleam on her mouth. A beauty, he thought, the word lighting him from the inside. "Are you, all right?" he asked. "You look put out." He gave a small laugh. "Not my business, I know. Only you're sitting like the world forgot you. Her lips parted, but the breath that came was shallow. She tucked a curl behind her ear. Her eyes didn't rise. He took that as invitation. He set a hand on the wall. His good ring caught the light and leaned the arm he liked best in shirt sleeves. You know, if someone slighted you, that's poor show, he said. People can be low. I've had more than my share of it. You wouldn't think it, looking at me, but I know all about being wronged. She brushed her dress at the knee, slow and dreamy. The hem was hand-sewn, each stitch a little different, tidy but human. It put him in mind of a mother at a table. Of course he shook that thought away. I'm Cormac, he said. O'Brien, the hill house yonder. My people go back. Not that lineage is everything. A man is what he makes of himself. I've kept the place and I've kept myself. He smiled the kindness he had practiced. If you need an arm to walk you home. She made a sound then, a breath with a hum in it, not yes or no, the sound a person makes when they're keeping tears down and keeping cracks. He softened his voice. Do you have people near? He noticed her hands for the first time. They lay on the stones like small birds. The nails were pale and neat, but as he watched, faint lines showed at the knuckles, like old paper through new. A speckled patch he hadn't seen seemed darker, with two more beside it, like tea drops. He blinked and felt foolish for blinking. Even light plays tricks, he told himself. She drew one foot up, toes on the wall, arms around the knee. The sole was clean, as if she hardly touched the ground. Who sat barefoot on a wall with feet that clean? For a silly second thought, he thought she must float. He smiled at himself for thinking it, and kept smiling because he liked the feel of it on his face. You've the look of a girl from a song, he said. What brings you to this bend? Her hair slid forward. At the temple he saw a single white thread he swore hadn't been there a heartbeat before. His smile tightened. No, he pushed the thought away. There are greys in every dark head if the sun hits right. At last she lifted her eyes. They were green and full, so full of sadness that had no age. His lines left him. Something cold stroked the back of his neck. If you've had a loss, he said, careful now, I'm so sorry. He used his softer tone. He was good at softer. I've had losses too. That sounded noble. He liked how it sounded. He pushed on. All mine are gone now, he said, one of those lines that showed depth without giving anything away. Her mouth trembled. A tear ran, darkening the fine hairs on her cheek. Ah, there now, he said. Don't. His hand rose, fell. Forgive me, I'm no use with tears. It's been a long time since well. He looked down to give her privacy. A beetle fell through the crack. A tuft of heather leaned. A line of snails clung like beads. I've kept the place, he heard himself add, because it was the one thing no one could argue. I kept it nice, too. She shut her eyes. Another tear slipped. When it reached her cheek's edge, it was darker than it should have been, not grey with dust, dark like diluted ink. He stared. A dry metallic taste touched his tongue. He swallowed. A small breeze came up from the stream and died. Far off, a cat wailed, and the sound folded back into the evening. He looked at her hands again. The lines were deeper now. The skin had the faint mottling of hands that had scrubbed too many floors. A vein rose like blue thread. A nail showed a yellow ridge. He told himself hard now that grief and light were tricking him. He told himself she was still beautiful because he needed her to be. Would you walk? he tried. Moving helps. I can carry your shoes if you've any hid in the grass. He forced a quick laugh. Or I'll carry you if you fancy scandal. She didn't rise. Her head dipped and the tears came steady, quiet and sure, as if she were pouring from a small jug and knew the exact measure. He glanced up the road. No one. Down the bend, only the old hawthorn. A sick green thread unwound in his belly. He pushed it down. He never failed a roadside talk. He could charm a locked door. He could charm a priest out of a complaint. He could charm a girl at a dance and make her think she had walked to the dark corner herself. Listen, he said gently. You don't know me, but I'm sound. Say the word and I'll fetch someone or I'll walk you home. Her lips moved. He leaned close enough to catch a faint sweetness like an apple peel. And under it, something cold, like a room that had gone long without a fire. What was that? He whispered. I didn't catch that. Her eyes opened. They looked older than eyes should look. The next tear that fell was black. When it touched the stone, it left a stain that didn't fade. His heart skipped a beat. The wall under his palm felt warm, then cold, as if his blood couldn't choose. He stepped back without meaning to. The beetle had vanished. The snails clung. A rook called once and went quiet. Who are you? He said, still smiling because the smile was armor and habit. Tell me your name. She stood. He hadn't seen her set her hands. She was simply on her feet, on the wall, light as if she weighed less than a child. The dress hung looser. Her hair slid and more white threaded the dark. He tasted fear. It was thin and bitter, and he hated the taste. He told himself to run. He told himself not to be ridiculous. Pride held him where he was. My people are gone, he tried again, stupid now, as if words could push the world back. There's no one left to be cried for, not by... He stopped. He wouldn't say the name. He wasn't a fool. Names opened doors. She lifted her head and looked at him full. The beauty was changing as he watched. The soft mouth thinned, the cheeks hollowed, fine skin turned fragile. The airs deepened and burned. Black tears tracked down and stained her chin. He knew then, with the bone-deep knowing of childhood fireside talk, what she was and had always been in such stories. His lips formed it. Banshee, he breathed. Her voice came like wind through stone. You are the last Cormac O'Brien. He rushed to fill the air. I am, but there's no call, no one, there's no sweetheart, no. I come for the loved, she said. He grabbed the rope of it. There's no one, he snapped, eager and harsh, as if harshness might frighten her away. No mother left, no child, no, I've no one you'd waste a tear on. Her head tipped a fraction. Her hands were old hands now, proper old, with a small tremor like a candle when a door opens. A black tear fell and stained the stone. You have one, she said. Who? He hated the thinness of his voice. For whom did you save the best chair? She asked. For whom did you polish the glass? For whom did you lift your shoulders when no one watched? For whom did you practice your kind eyes in the kettle lid? That's foolishness, he said, and even to his own ears it sounded like a boy's lie. For whom, she said softly, did you keep the house, O'Brien? For whom did you keep yourself? He tried to think of another name, any name but the one that rose. He tried and failed. The failing made his breath hitch. She changed again, and now she did not hide it. The beautiful face drew back to bone, the hair went white in a crawl, the mouth thinned to a pale line and then sagged at the corners with ancient grief. The next keen came low and poor and fierce. The hedges seemed to fold, the rook lifted and fled. The cat far off broke into a long, agonizing wail. He saw himself then, clear as glass, the road strut, the saved chair, the practised laugh, the mirror held dear. Shame hit him hard and hot. I'm a decent man, he said, because men bargain even where no bargains are made. Ask the parish, I kept the house. A house is not a person, she said. Well, what can I do? He asked, frantic for a rule, a trick, anything. She was quiet a long second. He thought she might answer. Instead, she stepped down from the wall. Her bare feet touched the dust and left no mark. She moved past him toward the bend. He reached a hand without meaning to, and she didn't look back. Tell me what to do, he said, one last grasp. She gave him nothing. The banshee's face, old as winter, old as love, turned once toward the hawthorn, and then she went around the bend and was gone. The stream talked to itself, the air held still. He stood in the road a long time, light draining from the hedges. He looked up at the O'Brien house on the hill. The windows were dark squares, the door a small mouth. He had never seen it as lonely. Now he saw the loneliness standing on the step, waiting to go inside. He walked back slower than he'd come, shirt sticking to his spine. Inside he lit a lamp and sat on the table. He said his people's names without flourish. He stayed there till the wick burned low and no answer came. 2 evenings later, after a short rain, Mrs. Kelleher from the lower field found him. She had come to ask after a borrowed spade and saw the yard gate wide, the kitchen door unlatched, the damp smell of fresh water on the air. She called once, twice, no reply. She stepped in, frowned at the empty chair, and went looking. She found him in the yard by the back wall, face down, in the rain barrel he kept for washing windows and slicking his hair when no glass would do. One boot on the stool, a shiny comb still gripped tight in his right hand, his good shirt on, his best collar stud fastened hard and high. It looked, people said later, as if he had leaned in to check his reflection in the clear skin of the barrel and gone that inch too far. They told the story in the village with lowered voices because a man had died, and you don't make light of that. But there was a quiet sting to it too, for those who knew the way Cormac O'Brien loved any surface that would give him himself back. Old men muttered that a barrel can take a strong man easy if he breathes wrong at the wrong moment. The women crossed themselves and shook their heads. A boy asked why anyone would peer at his face in a tub, and his mother said, "Hush." When they laid him out, one neighbour said she thought she heard, far off, the thin edge of a cry rise and fall, and rise again. Another said it was only wind over the stream. They both let it be. There was no one to lift the O'Brien name. The house on the hill grew quiet in a new way. In time, a cousin from a cousin's line took the key, and the fields were let to a man with good calves and a simple nature. If anyone passing the bend by the old hawthorn thinks at day's end that the stones there hold a darker stain than most, they keep it to themselves. And if someone in a soft voice says banshee when the night is close and the hedges lean in, they say it like a plain truth and walk on. Rain shedded the night over Portumna, cold enough to bite. Down in the hollow, the lone cottage burned a soft orange behind its small windows, the only warmth for miles. In the trees behind it, 3 voices argued. The man's voice was sharp as a knife edge. He's right there, warm, fed, not a bother on him. While we're soaked and starving, I say we go in there and snap his bloody neck. It's that simple. The woman's voice snapped back, low and steady. You want to kill a man because you're cold, because you're bored? That's all this is, theatre for your ego. You talk too much, the man growled. We go in and we do it, and that's the end of it. The boy's voice quivered. Why though? What did he do? I don't want to kill anyone. The man laughed, a cruel, breathy sound. He doesn't have to have done anything. I want it, and that's enough. Feels good to decide who gets to live. It feels powerful. That's not power, the woman said. That's sickness. The boy swallowed. Maybe we should leave. Maybe he'll hear us. He won't hear anything until I get my hands on him, the man said. Now move. The night won't last forever. But the woman kept pushing. You're dragging him into a murder, a child. You want him to watch you break a man's neck? He should watch, the man said. Teaches him the world isn't soft. The boy whispered, cracking. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here. You're here, the man snapped. So you're a part of it. Wind battered the treetops, rattling branches. The man's voice pressed harder, greedy and breathless. Come on. He's an old man, half drunk by the fire. It's perfect. We don't have to do anything, the woman insisted. I do, he said. I need to. You don't understand. The boy whimpered. Please, don't fight. But the man pushed through the trees, boots squelching in mud, moving straight for the cottage. The woman followed because she always did. The boy followed because he was afraid of being left alone. They reached the yard, 3 shadows in the rain, 3 voices whispering over each other. Inside, the old man nodded off by the fire, whiskey slumped in his hand. The hearth cracked softly, rain drummed on the thatch. He didn't hear them cross the yard. He didn't hear the soft creak of the door unlocking. He didn't hear the footsteps creeping across the timbers behind him. He only felt the cold. He blinked awake. A figure stood behind him, soaked through, head bowed, hair hanging like seaweed. A teenage girl, barefoot, clothes torn, shaking, her breath dragged in and out, 3 different rhythms fighting each other in one chest. He opened his mouth to speak, but she was already standing over him. Her breath heaved with the murderous intent of a violent man, but her eyes carried the pity of a reasonable woman, and from those same eyes spilt the silent, trembling tears of a terrified child. He tried to stand, too slow. Her hands clamped the sides of his head, and she twisted, a single, brutal motion. The fire cracked, his glass fell. The cottage went quiet. At dawn, a farmer found the cottage door hanging open, the chair overturned, the whiskey spilled. No trace of the old man, not a drop of blood, not a drag mark, nothing but a single trail of muddy footprints leading away toward the trees. An hour later, a rider from St. Bridget's Asylum arrived. A patient had escaped the night before, dangerous, unstable, prone to violent episodes. A 16-year-old girl. They searched for her until nightfall, never found her. But every so often, near the cottage ruins, someone walking home after dark swears they hear 3 voices drifting through the trees, one angry, one calm, one afraid, all coming from the throat of one girl wandering the night. It was a wild, wet evening in Ballymoran. A turf fire burned low in the hearth and a man sat close to it, his wife by his side and their 5 children gathered around. The wind rattled at the windows, but inside it was warm and it was safe. The man lifted his mug, took a quiet sip and said, "Now, listen well, the lot of ye. There's an old story told around these parts. You won't find it in any book. It's the story of a woman named Moraith. They said the swamp beyond Ballymoran moved even when the wind was still. Said a woman lived there high in an old tree, and that her stories could quiet even the darkest dreams. No one went near her after nightfall, well, except for young Shane. He was 8, with a small heart that wanted to be brave, and a ferret named Stringeen who never listened to a word he said. One still night the ferret darted off through the rushes, chasing a flicker of green light. "Stringeen, come back," the boy whispered, stumbling after him. The mud gripped at his boots and the reeds hissed as he passed. The swamp opened into a wide pool, black and still. At its centre stood a crooked tree, its bark slick with moss and silver in the moonlight. Something inside the hollow moved. A woman leaned forward from the trunk, half flesh, half timber. From the waist down, she was part of the tree itself. Roots coiled from her hips into the water. Her skin had a faint green tint of leaves left too long from light. Her hair hung wet and heavy, slicked with weeds and tiny shells. Her eyes shone the colour of pond water. "Don't run, child," she said softly. "They always run. I only want to tell a story." Her voice cracked but carried warmth, the kind voice you'd trust without knowing why. Shane hesitated, then nodded. "All right," says he. "I'll listen." The woman smiled, small and patient. "My name's Moraith," she said. "I tell stories to keep the dark from spreading." From a fold in her bark-woven robe she drew a little book, its pages swollen from damp. Then, to the boy's surprise, she reached into a pouch of moss and took out a pair of reading glasses, tiny, round, one lens cracked. She perched them on her long nose, opened the book, and the swamp fell still. A robin came fluttering down to rest on her shoulder. 2 moths circled her face like drifting sparks. "Now," she said, "listen well. This is the story of a girl who entered a forest that did not want her. There was a young girl named Nell, and her home stood at the edge of a great wood. Her mother fell ill one winter and food ran short. So Nell took a basket and went into the forest to find something, anything, to keep them warm and alive. She was told never to leave the path, but hunger is louder than warnings. She gathered what she could, berries, a few nuts, small roots, until she heard a faint cry, frightened and lost. A fox cub lay caught in a wire snare, its paw twisted tight. The girl knelt beside it. "Be still," she said, "I'll help you." Her hands shook, but she worked the wire loose until the paw came free. The cub ran off into the trees. When she turned back, the path was gone, the forest had shifted. The air grew heavy, the light dimmed, and somewhere close a voice said, "You were lost because you were spared." The girl spun around, but no one was there. The voice came again. "The forest keeps what it takes. You took life from its hands when you freed the fox. To walk free, you must give life back." The roots at her feet began to stir. Branches bent low. She ran, the trees closing behind her. At last she reached a hollow oak. Inside were bones, small and human. Among them a locket gleamed. It was hers. She fell to her knees. She understood then what the forest wanted. It wanted her life. But it wanted more than death. It wanted service. So she made a promise. If the forest would let her live, she would stay within its bounds and keep its hunger fed. The forest accepted. Its roots wrapped around her legs, and when the sun rose, she was no longer a girl at all. She had become a part of the wood itself, and so she lived. She lived because she fed the forest what it needed. Every lost wanderer who came too close. Moraith closed the book with a soft sound. The robin stayed where it was. The swamp was still and hushed. "That was lovely," Shane said. "You tell them better than anyone at school. You're not scary at all." Moraith smiled down at him, eyes warm behind her little glasses. "Thank you, child. Not many stay to listen." He shifted Stringing in his arms. "But what did she do, the girl? You said she had to do something to live. What was it?" Moraith tilted her head. "She gave the forest what it asked for," she said softly. "A life that was not her own." Shane frowned. "Whose life?" he asked. For a long moment nothing moved, not the reeds, not the water. Even the robin went still. "The next one who wanders in," she said. The words hung in the air. Then the tree beneath her gave a slow groan. She began to rise higher from the trunk, her roots pulling free, her arms stretching like branches. She removed her glasses, folded them neatly onto the open book, and smiled the same soft smile she had worn all along. "Thank you for listening, child," says she. "You've been very kind." Shane took a step back, his heart beating hard. Stringing squealed in his arms. Moraith leaned forward. Her shadow spread across the ground. "Stories keep the dark from spreading," she whispered, "but the dark must still be fed." Her arms swept wide, a rustle, a rush, a sound like wind through leaves, then silence, only the ripple of water once and nothing more. At dawn, Stringing was found on the back step of Shane's house. He was filthy, trembling, and streaked with blood. The blood wasn't his. And in the swamp beyond Ballymoran, when the wind was still, people said you could hear a woman's voice begin another tale, gentle, patient, and kind. They say there's a woman by the river when death comes close. They call her the Bean Nighe, the washerwoman. She doesn't come for the dying alone. Sometimes she comes for the cruel. She doesn't kill you. She makes you feel what you've done. Old people say she sits by the water washing clothes that will never dry. They say she was old before the first road was built, and that she knows every name that's ever echoed off the water. This story takes place in a cold January when the snow stayed on the ground for weeks and the wind cut through every coat. Owen Divley was a bully. He made his living off fear. Shopkeepers paid him to mind their doors. Carts gave him coins so they wouldn't slip at the corner. He had a warm coat, full pockets, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. That evening he was walking through town with nothing to do but look for trouble. Up ahead he saw a young lad carrying a small paper bag under his arm. Something clinked inside. Owen followed, keeping his hands in his pockets and a half smirk on his face. "Where are you off to?" he said. The lad flinched. "I'm going home. It's medicine for me dad." Owen moved to block him. "Here, let's have a look." The boy shook his head and tried to step around. Owen stepped in, grabbed the boy by the throat and gave him 2 sharp boxes into the jaw, knocking the lad to the ground. He grinned, the grin of a bully who liked the quiet that followed. He turned to walk away, but then a voice came from behind him. At the end of the street stood a woman in a dark cloak. Her skin was pale, and there was something strange about her hands, thin and light-haired, almost like fur. She didn't move toward him, but her eyes were fixed on his. Her voice came clear and steady. "Tá tú walk, feici tú anish, moving to poin, ní féidir leat éilú, ici tú as. You are evil, you will see now, you will feel pain, you cannot escape, and you will pay for it." "Go home, woman," Owen said, "or the cold will finish you off before I do." The air shifted, it went still, too still, the light seemed to bend. Something inside him pulled like a rope being yanked tight, and then everything went white. When he opened his eyes again, the world had changed. The walls were close, the light was dim, and a candle shook on the table. His whole body hurt, his ribs, his head, his jaw. "Thomas, are you back, lad?" The voice came from a corner, weak, strained. It was the boy's father. Owen tried to answer, but what came out wasn't his voice. "Hi, Dad, I'm back," the boy's mouth said. He tried to move on his own, but the body didn't obey him. Owen could only watch and feel, trapped behind the boy's eyes. Every motion was slow and heavy. He looked at the table. The paper bag was torn, the bottle gone. The weight of dread pressed down. Owen felt it as if it were his own. Morning came, grey. Through the window he could see the street covered in snow, smoke rising from chimneys. The boy, the body he was in, wrapped a scarf around his neck and walked to the apothecary. "Please, sir," the boy said, "my father's medicine. I'll pay you tomorrow." The shopkeeper frowned. "I told you already, Thomas, no more credit." He nodded toward the door. The boy turned and walked out, his head low. The bell on the door gave one bright ring. Shame burned in Owen's chest. It was the worst than any blow he had ever taken. He tried the baker next, then a neighbour, then another, each time the same, "No, sorry, can't help." He knocked, waited, shivered, coughed, swallowed, a latch lifted, a latch fell, a face looked out, a face turned away. By nightfall he was weak from hunger. When he finally reached home, the candle was nearly out. The father's breathing was shallow and rattling. The boy knelt beside the bed and held his father's hand. "I tried, Dad. I swear, I tried." Owen felt the tears come. He felt the weight of it, all the small cruelties he caused that now came back as feeling. Through the window he saw her again, the washerwoman by the river. Her basin glimmered faintly. She was washing a shirt that would never come clean, and she whispered, "Fanny an pian lath. The pain will stay with you." As Thomas walked the town the next day, Owen's thoughts began to slip, just for seconds, into other people's lives. Each moment was sharp and sudden, like his mind was being shown flashes of what others had felt because of him. He felt the ache in a grocer's back from lifting heavy boxes alone. He felt a mother's hunger as she watered down a pot of stew and told her child it was a new recipe. He felt cold feet on a road out of town and the sting of wind in his eyes after being told not to come back. Each flash was like a spark landing on his skin. Then came the last one. He saw a small kitchen, a turf fire glowed, a strap hung by the door, and he saw his own hands, smaller, younger, trembling. His mother stood over him, her face hard and red. She shouted words that made no sense, and the strap came down on his back again and again. He could hear himself crying, begging, and she didn't stop. He wanted to turn away, but he couldn't. He had to watch it all, feel it all, had to remember the start of what he had become. Then it was gone, and he was back in the snow, shaking. The pain that stayed with him wasn't from the strap, it was from knowing that she never cared if she went too far. She called it teaching because it had broken something instead. And now he'd spent his life passing that same pain to others. That evening he sat beside the boy's father. The man's breathing was shallow, rattling in his chest. When it stopped, the silence that followed was like a hole in the air. Outside the window, the washerwoman was still at her basin. The water ran dark across the snow. Her voice came again, soft and even. "Dálam tú anish, ní rachi sé as do chrí." You have learned now. It will not leave your heart. The world turned again. He woke on a bench by the canal, his own coat, his own hands. The air was still, the town was quiet. Snow stretched across the streets like a blank page. His pockets were heavy with coin. They felt filthy. He thought of the boy's house. He thought of the father's breath fading away. He thought of every door that had closed on him, doors he had taught people to close. He stood and started walking. At the first house, he left money for the burial. At the second, he left coal. At the third, flour and bread. He wrote short notes and signed his name carefully, ashamed to even see it. Some doors opened and closed again without a word. Some faces spat in the snow. A few nodded. He didn't blame any of them. He waited, listened, took the words, took the silence, kept going. He didn't argue, he didn't explain, he paid. It didn't fix anything, but he kept going. Each coin he gave away left his hand slower, like he was learning how to let go. The days stayed grey. One night he walked along the river road. The lamps glowed faintly. He could hear music somewhere far off. Families were warm inside. Owen stopped in the middle of the street. He took off his coat and held it in both hands. "I've done harm," he said quietly. "I've taken what wasn't mine. I've made people afraid to walk home at night. I can't change what's gone, but I can work for what's left, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He sank to his knees. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one window lit up, then another. A woman came out wrapped in a shawl. She looked at him for a long time. "You know you'll freeze there," she said. "Come on in out of it." He followed her inside. The room was small and warm. She poured soup into a bowl and set it in front of him. He didn't touch it until she nodded. She never said she forgave him. She didn't need to. She gave him a seat and warmth, and that was enough. When he'd finished eating, she said, "Tomorrow you'll carry coal for Mrs. Byrne 2 doors down, then you'll help dig at Thomas's place. I think that will be best." Her voice was plain. It gave him direction, not comfort. "I will," he said. Later that night, by the river, the washerwoman crouched again. She rinsed the little shirt one last time and let the current take it. Her voice came softly through the cold air. "Ní scríoiste an aimsir a hui heart, ach is féidir leat tas a jabhart inniu." Time gone by isn't undone, but you can bring warmth today. She turned and vanished into the dark. Owen slept that night beside the range with his coat over his legs. When he woke, he worked, he carried coal, he fixed doors, he kept his head down. He didn't talk about changing, he just changed a bit each day. He didn't ask for thanks, he said, "Thank you." When he walked home at night, he sometimes stopped by the canal. He'd listen to the water and think of the woman by the river. He'd leave a coin on the wall for whoever needed it next. And from that night on, the washerwoman said no more. The lesson had been given. The days now would answer it. The sky had settled into the soft grey of a late spring day, the kind that sits quiet over the fields and lets the world breathe. John Doran lowered himself onto the damp stone stile with a grunt, wiping the sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his shirt. He unwrapped a thick ham sandwich from brown paper and took a bite, chewing slowly, content with the weight of the day's work behind him. A few yards away, Keith Doran came trudging back from the far gate, boots muddy, shoulders slumped, hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. He looked out of place in the field, too neat, too restless, too city-built for farm work. But he dropped onto the stone beside his uncle, all the same, rubbing his hands and breathing hard. "Bloody hell," Keith muttered. "How do you do this every day?" "I get up and I do it," John said, taking another bite. "You'll be surprised how simple a life is when you stop complaining through half of it." Keith gave him a sideways glare. "I'm only here because Mam said you'd keep me out of trouble." "Aye, and she's usually right," John said. "Now eat." Keith took the second sandwich John handed him. He peeled open the paper and stared at it as if expecting something magical to fall out. The field around them hummed with insects. A faint breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass, and somewhere far off a dog was barking. Nothing unusual, nothing magical, nothing mythical. "Uncle," Keith said through a mouthful of ham, "you know that stump up by the old ash, the one you told me not to touch?" "Aye." "Well, why, it's a stump." John chewed again, swallowed. "Because it's a fairy stump," he said simply. "You leave them be." Keith let out a breath that was half a laugh, half disbelief. "Oh, here we go." John didn't react. He just tucked his paper under his thigh to keep it from blowing away. "There's no such thing," Keith said. "And there's no such thing to you," John said. "Different thing entirely." Keith rolled his eyes. "Uncle, it's a rotted stump. You know what rotted it? Time, weather, worms, not fairies." "If you think worms do all the damage in this world," John said, "you've lived too long in that concrete box you call a town." Keith plucked a blade of grass and tore it between his fingers. "You actually believe that? Like the stuff you were saying earlier about not walking the boundary after dark or not cutting the whitethorn? You can't." "I can," John said, "and I do." "But why?" Keith asked. "Like, actually, why? I mean, explain the logic of it properly. Not the that's the way sort of answer, the real reason." John took a long breath through his nose and set his sandwich on his knee. "Keith, I've lived on this land 59 years. I've seen good years, I've seen bad ones. I've carried men out of fields, and I've watched neighbours bury sons that didn't need burying. Do you think every accident was an accident? There's patterns, lad. You live long enough and you see the same mistakes again and again." "That's not evidence," Keith said. "It's enough for me," John replied. Keith shook his head. "That's not how truth works." "That's exactly how truth works," John said. "Out here." The nephew huffed and pushed the heel of his boot into the grass. "Give me one good reason," he said. "One good reason that isn't 'that's the way our grandfather said' or 'that's what the old fellas believed.' Something real." John took his time. He folded the paper of his sandwich back into place before answering. "Fine," he said. "Here's one. Do you remember old Porrick Walsh?" "The fellow with the limp?" Keith asked. "That's him." "Yeah, I remember him." "Well," John said, pointing his finger, "he went up one morning to cut a ring of mushrooms. He didn't believe in fairies either, said it was all nonsense, said it was just a circle of fungus. He went out with his scythe, and the next day he couldn't walk. His leg was black from hip to ankle. His wife swore blind it was the circle that did it." Keith raised his eyebrows. "Or maybe he had an infection, or a bruise, or an allergy. People get sick for normal reasons, Uncle." John shrugged. "Aye, it could have been, but it happened the same day he cut a ring he knew better than to touch. If it was one lad, you would say coincidence, but it's happened 5 times to 5 different men in this parish. Coincidence runs out after a while." Keith opened his mouth and closed it, then frowned and looked across the field. "That still doesn't make it fairies." "You asked for a reason," John said, "and that's mine." They ate in silence for a moment. A soft gust of wind brushed the grass, bending it in long lines. A crow cawed from the far hedge. Keith cleared his throat. "You really think there's beings out there, like actually out there, watching us?" John wiped the crumbs from his beard. "They're older than the church, older than the counties, older than your school books. They don't come out for show. They don't care if you believe. They don't care if you speak their name. They only care if you cross them." Keith laughed. That's the most vague thing I've ever heard. John gave him a small grin. Good. Vague things keep you alive. Keith groaned. Jesus, you're impossible. John took another bite, chewed and swallowed. You want to argue? Go on then, give me your best. Keith perked up, glad to be on familiar ground. Okay, my first argument. If these things are real, fairies, whatever, where are they? Why is it someone's cousin's neighbour who sees something? Why is there never a clear picture or body or a bit of evidence? John snorted. You want a fairy to pose for you. That's not what I'm saying. It is, John said, and here's your answer. You're looking for them the way you'd look for a cow in a field. Wrong type of creature, wrong type of thinking. Meaning you don't find fairies with your eyes, John said. You find them with things that go wrong with you. A man who goes mad after digging a whitethorn, a horse that won't pass a gap in the hedge at night, a baby that screams when you put him in a certain room and sleeps fine in every other one. People think those are small things. They're not. Keith blinked. You're saying fairies are what? Malfunctions? I'm saying they're there, John said, and they don't waste time proving it to you. They just act, and you feel the result. That's not an argument, Keith said. That's life, John replied. Keith leaned back on his hands. Okay, second argument. If fairies are so dangerous, why doesn't anyone stop them? Why hasn't anyone done something? Why aren't the guards involved? Why isn't it on the news? Oh, Lord, would you give me strength? John muttered. Keith, will you listen to yourself? What? You want the guards to arrest a fairy? Keith flushed. That's not what You think the news is going to run a headline saying local lad angered the good folk and was carried off? Keith pushed back his hair, frustrated. It doesn't make sense. None of this fits with how the world works. That's because you don't know how the world works, John said gently, not unkindly. You only know how the city works. Keith stared at the ground. After a long moment, John added softly, You think all this is about tiny men with pointy hats dancing in fields. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about rules older than your family tree. You do this, don't do that, respect this, avoid that. Break enough of those rules and the land will spit you out. Keith tapped his foot. And you really believe that? John's answer was simple. Yes. Wind rolled through the grass again. This time it was softer, warmer. The sun dipped in and out of a thin sheet of cloud. Keith took a long breath, then stood up and stretched. Well, he said, believe what you want, but I'm telling you now I'm not afraid of a stump. John didn't look at him. Don't touch it. I'm going to prove it's nothing, Keith said, brushing off his jeans. Watch me. John sighed. Keith? But the nephew was already stomping toward the old ash stump at the far end of the field. John stayed where he was, hands folded, watching quietly. Keith stopped in front of the stump. It was nothing special, grey, cracked, surrounded by a ring of mushrooms so faint it was barely there. He looked back at John. See, it's just The hair rose on the back of his neck. He paused. The field went still, utterly still. No wind or birds, no sound whatsoever. A feeling, not dread or fear, but a strange, heavy pressure settled on him as if the air itself had leaned in close. He swallowed. Uncle, he said, quieter now. Step back, John called. Keith did, slowly, very slowly. He walked back across the grass and sat beside his uncle again, out of breath for reasons he couldn't explain. John didn't smirk. He didn't say, I told you so. He only nodded once and finished the last of his sandwich. For a moment, the only sound was chewing. Keith whispered, What? What was that? John wiped crumbs from his hands. You felt it? Keith didn't answer. John looked out over the field, eyes calm, voice soft. You don't have to believe in them, lad, he said. They don't need your belief. Keith stared straight ahead. They only need you to make one mistake. The wind picked up again, gentle, harmless, and the field returned to normal. Keith swallowed, wiped his palms and his jeans, and didn't say another word for a long time. And John, with the quiet smile of a man who'd lived long enough to stop arguing, simply sat beside him as the breeze carried on across the grass. When you wake in the morning, please like, subscribe, and leave a little comment below. Your quiet clicks and words are what keep this place alive. The small echoes that let the stories live on. Come back every night and let this be your resting place. Good night.